So here's the project for the Martian, and it's at 116 beats per minute, and here's how it sounds. So let's start from the very beginning, which is the strings. Now, there's this really deep bass that's going on here. It's pretty straightforward. They're sort of paired up with the cellos like this. They sound like that. And what gives them more character is the automation, as you can see here, right? There's automation all around. There's quite a bit of sort of rises and dips, and that gives it that sort of breathing feeling, especially with the violas as well. So with the violas, here's how it sounds, and here's how it looks. This is the standard strings you can find in EXS24, orchestral strings and basses legato. And same thing with the cellos. Here we go, orchestral strings and cellos plus. And I sent it to a bus, which has a space designer on it. And I picked warm hall. I kind of liked the feeling of that. It's got this warm hall feeling, and I turned the reverb mix all the way up, the dry mix to 0, and you get that kind of nice warm hall. And same with the cellos, I sent it over there. We'll get to this bass later, that's the one near the end, and the violas as well. Now, just a tip here, when you automate stuff, sometimes you might find that you need to increase the gain. You might be tempted to open the automation and shift all the gains up. And when you have a lot of automation, it's kind of troublesome to shift everything up. So what you can do is put a gain plugin So it's under utility, gain, right? And you can mess around with the gain. So in this case, I felt like the violas needed more loudness, and I wanted to keep the dynamics in here, so I just put a gain and just added 3. So that's how you balance stuff out. Now, let's look at the rest of the song. Now this track is really sort of has a lot of pads and ambient stuff going around. So I got this Aether choir, which sounds kind of like this. Very ethereal choir kind of thing. It's alchemy. And I went to pick soundscapes, and I just picked the ones that I like, and that's why it's near A, and I moved it to distance. And you can hear that this really distant kind of choir sound coming along. So it's very pad-like stuff. And the next thing, which gives a lot of the melodic signature to the rhythm, is this harp, which you can find in orchestral harp. And it sounds like this. And you can hear it's kind of that ping pong type delay, right? And that ping pong delay from left to right is under stereo delay. And basically I messed around with the default ones. So I moved to a quarter note on the left side and a half note on the right side. And yeah, and basically increase the feedback and the output. So these are the settings to get that left-right ping pong delay according to this particular thing. It needs to be tempo synced, of course. And there's another harp, which is exactly the same harp. I just basically use this duplicate settings. And without the stereo delay, you can see I just turned it off. Right? It's on and it's off. And some lines in that harp does not have a delay. So it's just... So it goes... So, you know, you can mix different things along the way. And there's another harp here, which is the same harp, also with the stereo delay removed. But you can see that the levels here are very different. This one is, minus 1.7, and this one is a minus 8.4. And the pattern, I'm just going to play it. So it sits differently in the mix. And, you know, sometimes people use automation for different levels of a particular instrument. I prefer to actually just duplicate the instrument and change the levels if it's going to be a fairly constant level change in a different section. Now, we have the violas as well, and it's a pizzicato viola. It kind of goes like this. Really straightforward, and sent it to the same bus as well, the warm hall bus. And here's how it sounds with the harp. It's a pretty repeating pattern, and the bass though sort of shifts a little bit to bring the chord somewhere else. Now, I picked an ES2 bass, and I use an electric bass and the synth bass, and I mucked around with the cutoff to get, later you will see an automation come on, and this automation is the cutoff automation, LPF cutoff on the ES2. You can see it over here. You can find it here under filter and LPF cutoff. There you go. And that opens up the filter, and it gives a sort of brighter sound to it. So it starts off like this. It's just an octave. Pretty unassuming. But when you get to this point, so it opens up the filter, so you can see the different automation as the time goes by. Now let's close it up again. And that's kind of the first bit. When you put it together, it's going to sound like that. It's kind of continuous dreamy tone with a little of sort of like running feeling about it. And then this little arpeggiated section comes in. It's kind of like an ARP. I didn't use an ARP because the pattern seems to jump all over the place. Sounds like this. So this is one layer of it. So it alternates between an A pattern and a B pattern, and then it just repeats itself. So it's an ES2, and I mucked around with the basic synth as well. It's the user default, and I mucked around with the ADS-R to get the kind of clicky sound. So you pull the sustain down, increase the decay a little bit, mess with the attack a little bit, and then I got this. But the original sound sounds like this. A bit too bright. So I kind of put an EQ on, took out the low end, took out the high end, sort of band past it, and it sounds like this. More mellow, that's pretty good. But I felt that it was too centered, too mono, right? So I kind of added this chorus, this mega white chorus. It sounded like this. So it sort of like spreads it out to the left and right. Now, there's this little sort of same thing. I just copied the MIDI over on a sculpture track. Funky Lick Stratocaster. It sounds like that. Gives a little bit different of an attack, and if I open up automation, you can see it slowly increases. So it actually starts with nothing and slowly increases, and this is how it sounds together. Kind of works well in the context of everything. Now it comes to the piano, which is this big line here. Now without the channel EQ, this is under acoustic pianos, classical piano. It's a bit too bright if you take out the EQ. So you need to EQ the low end off, EQ roll off the high end, so it becomes a much more mellow piano. Now, we had to send it to a different reverb because this reverb is like, it needs to be super dreamy, right? So I went to a large space, halls, Dream Hall, and you know, dreamy, Dream Hall, and up the reverb, reduce the dry, and just send a gob load of it to that reverb, and you get that nice sort of ambient kind of sound. Really spacious kind of sound. And I doubled that with, under orchestral tune percussion, a glockenspiel. And I roll off the high end as well because the glockenspiel, you know, they tend to be really bright, and in this case it needs to be much darker. Same reverb, and when you pair it together, it sounds like this. You can hear that reverb going on, really sweet. And yeah, so that's when it comes in right here. Now you can hear that bass come in. So this bass is an ES2 bass. I picked a synth bass, real fat. Now I mucked around with the cutoff a little bit, and I put an ARP. Now what this ARP is basically a 16th rate ARP. Very simple because I'm just playing one note. You can see I'm just playing one note, not two notes at any one time. So the pattern doesn't really matter whether it's ascending, descending, or whatever. It's gonna sound like this. So it's nice, this really fat synth sound, and there's an automation on it as well. There's a little bit of increase and decrease over time. All right, and there's another choir here. It's actually very similar to the ether choir. I reckon it's probably just modified a little bit. Distance is still the same. Yeah, let's have a listen. I think it's just different levels. Still the same, yeah. So it's just same as this is the choir, but different levels and different track. And here we have some sort of like high frequency percussion. Have a listen. So it's kind of like this percussion that comes in and out. I used an ARP as well, a 1/16 ARP, and I used a 2-step remix. Now it's over here. It's drum kit, drums and percussion, electronic drum kit 2-step remix. Send it to bus 1, and basically it's just that hat, right? And that's it. It's just the same thing throughout. And you have another little like pad like thing. It's Alchemy. Under Arpeggiated Ambient International Mystery, I pulled it right in the middle here. And it sounds like this. So it kind of comes in with this track. So when the track kind of disappears, this one disappears as well. It's just sort of like little textures to give it a bit more interest, right? Now the big line. I picked a Celtic dulcimer because it's got that nice sort of hammered string kind of sound. So under World European Celtic hammered dulcimer, and I send it to the bus 2 as well because it needs to have that big dreamy sound. It sounds like this. Now you notice that this is one track and this is the other track with the other note, the high note and the low notes here. So this one holds the low note and this one holds the high note. The reason I did this is because this one has a stereo delay like the piano, right? And the high note has the delay, but the low note has no delay. It's turned off. So if you play it together, you hear this. Only delays on the high notes, which is what it's supposed to be like. Now we have this pattern on the Stratocaster here. It's paired with a slightly different version of this one. So it's the same one, but you can see that there is no chorus on this. There's no, it's just slightly different. A bit more aggressive. And there's an increase as well in sort of like the volume. It's part of all these automation that you can see in the track. They sort of give that life and character to the evolution of the track. So it's really important. Now we have this other one under pads, Ambient, Awake from a Dream, and we pulled it over here a little bit. Here's how it sounds. So sort of space filling kind of pad, and sort of fattens up the whole scene because this part it gets more intense. And we have a full brass, and that's something you can find under Orchestral Brass, Full Brass Plus. Now have a listen to this Full Brass Plus, and it sounds like this. Just keeps building up and building up, you know, and we have another alchemy track. You can see that there's a ton of pads here, pads, vocal pads above the clouds, and it sounds like this. So same thing the other side. So together with the track, it sounds like this. So you can hear all these different textures working together, right? Which is pretty cool. And the next section, you get the viola's tremolo. You can see there's a slight sort of like automation to increase the volume because this part is a whole build-up section. These are the patterns. You normally wouldn't pick a tremolo to play something like this, but I felt like the texture was just right. So since they're pretty short, I used the tremolo patch. So it's playing this sort of like ostinato kind of thing. Same bus 1. I rolled off the low end a little bit because it felt like it wasn't needed in this space. Just have a listen, right? So a bit thinner. And there's this same pattern. And it sounds like a sine wave. And it's pretty much it because it's the standard EXS24 sort of like when you load up EXS24, this is what you get, a sine wave. And I wanted that basic sine wave sound together with this. So I loaded it up, and with the accents, you have a French horn that is under orchestral brass French horns, and this is what's playing. No, really majestic kind of sound, and when you put it together, it really sounds good. And this full brass here kind of picks up after these horns. There's a bit of automation as well. So it kind of goes like. And it kind of goes on and on. It sort of builds up. And with horns, they're mostly very close voiced chords. You know, they're all very close clumped together, and it works really well for all of brass instruments. And then you have your viola line. Sort of like the main line, right? But I felt like it was a bit thin and didn't have the right texture, so I paired it with EXS Strings 1. You can find your EXS Strings 1 under Pop Strings EXS String 1, and the texture just works really well for this line here. It's nice and big and dramatic, and with the percussion, we have something interesting coming in at this point. It's the only sort of like real percussion coming in. It's kind of like a marchy kind of thing. So there's two things happening here. First is the snares. And it's actually a basic studio brush kit that you can find under Drums and Percussion's acoustic drum kits, studio brush kit. I EQ'd the heck out of it. You can use EQ tools, phone filter wideband, and I just pulled it slightly wider, but you get this really like phone kind of sound. And I sort of duplicated the kit on the next track, and I took out all the high end because this is where the kick is. So it sounds like that. I didn't want any clickiness coming through. I just wanted the boom of it, right? So yeah, it sounds like this. And I pair that with even lower boom. So it's orchestral tuned percussions is timpani single strokes. And it's just got these big booms, right? So it kind of goes together with everything. And that pairs with a bass that I said I was going to come back to on top here. So I copied this bass's legato. And what I did was I added an EQ and took off all the high end because I just wanted like really sort of like a rhythmic thing. If I left the high end in, it's going to sound a little bit like a bit too bright. So I took out all the high end and now it goes like this. So you can kind of hear the bass rhythm moving along, right? And I think that's pretty cool. And then it all goes along until it gets to the biggest point. So you can see that at this point, the strings, the main line, they're doubling up because it's really a strong section. And at the end, you get sort of this string slowly going from forte to piano, pianissimo, like sort of dying off, right? And that's basically it. You have your whole track.